Chapter 9 Reality Check Part 1. The next morning, Luz was up way before Amity was. She was pretty exhausted, but forced herself out of bed to get dressed and get ready for school anyway, deactivating her alarm before it could also wake Amity, who Luz was pretty sure had slept even less than her, so she really wanted to let her friends sleep in at least a little longer. She was up too early anyway. The only good thing about the fact that they'd both barely slept was that they'd been able to change Amity's bandage twice. Once before they'd first laid down to sleep, and the second time was about an hour ago. Both times, Luz had been able to apply new glyphs to her friend's back without risking her mom possibly seeing it. The wound wasn't healing as fast as Luz had hoped it would, but at least the magic eased Amity's pain a little and made it easier for her to move. That was already worth a lot. When Luz got downstairs, her mom was already in the kitchen, emptying the dishwasher and packing her daughter's lunch for school. I let Amity sleep a bit longer. I hope that's okay. I wasn't sure when you were planning to leave with her, but she didn't sleep very well, so I thought... Camila chuckled a bit at the rambled information greeting that was so very loose, and that she'd missed so dearly over the summer. She ruffled her daughter's hair when she got out of the kitchen, then handed Luz her Azora lunchbox. It's perfectly fine. Good morning, mija. Gracias, mommy. Luz put her lunchbox into her school bag. She'd completely forgotten to prepare any food to bring to school the day before because, well, school had kind of seemed like the least of her concerns. It still felt surreal that she was just supposed to go back to normal school today, despite everything that had happened over the summer and everything that was currently happening. And good morning to you, too. Luz got herself some apple juice and spread some jam on a slice of bread to eat before she left for school. Her mom sat down to eat beside her. Can you tell me a bit about Amity? Camila asked somewhat hesitantly after they'd finished breakfast. Nothing she wouldn't be comfortable with me knowing, of course, but anything that could help me connect with her a bit would already help. She needs support right now, and since you'll be at school, it will have to be me. Luz nodded. She didn't feel comfortable with the thought of leaving Amity's side after how bad the previous nights had been. But she didn't have much clue about the things her mom and Amity now had to take care of. So she was more likely to get in the way than be helpful. And considering how little some of her teachers and the principal already liked her, skipping on the first day of school probably wasn't the greatest idea. Telling her mom a bit about Amity so she could be supported properly was the least she could do. Luz thought for a moment, contemplating what Amity would be comfortable with her mom knowing before she decided what she should start with. So, first of all, and that's probably the most important thing to remember, Amity doesn't open up to others easily. Whatever you do, please don't take that personally. She's just been hurt and has a hard time forming relationships with others because of it. She needs time to learn to trust someone before she can really let them in. She's probably not going to tell you a lot about herself anytime soon. That's how she is with everyone. That was important, and also something she could tell her mom without really giving her any additional information about Amity. Camila nodded. Okay, understood. She ruffled her daughter's hair and couldn't help but think about her own relationship with Luz. It had been a long time since she last felt like her daughter was open with her about how she was feeling. When asked how her day had been, Luz's reply never went far beyond an alright and a shrug before she changed the topic. So the longer texts and letters had been a real surprise. Sometimes Camila was able to see through her daughter like no one else could. But most of the time, this girl she loved more than anything in the entire universe was like the world's most complicated riddle to her. She tried her best to understand her daughter, but Luz was often so wrapped up in her stories that her mother couldn't seem to reach her amidst them. Camila would have done anything to be closer to her daughter once more. But no matter what she tried, they kept drifting further and further away from each other the older Luz grew. She'd reassured her daughter so many times that they could talk about anything, that she would be there for her and listen to her. But despite Luz telling her she knew that, Camila knew there were lots of things her daughter kept from her. Not that she thought she needed to know everything that was going on in her daughter's life. Of course not. But she hadn't even known Luz had wanted to participate in the cheer tryouts or audition for the school play before being called into the principal's office because of the incidents. She felt like she was missing out on so much, and knowing that hurt because of how important Luz was to her, because she wanted to support her daughter when she was trying new things. Camila didn't know a lot about cheer, but she would have been willing to look some things up if she'd known how important that was to Luz. And while she was pretty sure her daughter didn't know that, Camila had actually been a theater kid back in her own high school days. She'd even played the lead in one year. It had been a long time since, sure, but she was still certain that if Luz had told her about the audition, she would have been able to help her. But she couldn't do that if her daughter didn't talk to her about anything. It wasn't entirely Luz's fault, of course. Camila knew that, if anything, it was her own. It had a lot to do with how much she worked. A lot of days she got home late or had to sleep during the day because of her night shifts. And while she loved the work at the hospital and knew that what she was doing was extremely important, there were days when she almost hated her job. She regretted working so much overtime because of how little time she got to spend with Luz as a result. And she often felt like she was unable to be there for her daughter the way she should have been, the way Luz deserved. At times like this, the glaring hole that Luz's father had left in her life was really hard to ignore. He'd always connected to their daughter so much easier than Camila could, but she couldn't change that he was gone. All she could do was try her best to make a life for herself and Luz without him. Camila's daughter tapped her arm gently, interrupting her thoughts. "Mom, are you okay?" Luz was looking up at her worriedly. Did I say something wrong? Please don't cry." Camila startled at the realization that she was indeed crying. No wonder Luz was so freaked out. "No, of course not, Carlino." She hugged her daughter to emphasize she wasn't mad, then wiped the tears off her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I got lost in my thoughts for a moment." "It's okay. I mean, we both know I do that a lot, so I'm not sure why you think you need to apologize about that to me of all people." Luz chuckled a bit, still worried, but mostly just relieved her mom wasn't mad at her. She didn't like fighting with her. "Is there anything else you could tell me about Amity?" Camila changed the topic back to the previous one before her daughter could dig deeper into why she'd been upset and get upset in turn. She knew that she really needed to talk to Luz about all of those things, and soon, but not when they only had about half an hour before Luz had to get to school. Luz nodded and continued where she left off. Well, school is really important to her, and she puts a lot of pressure on herself, in addition to the pressure that her parents already put on her. Or maybe because of it, so maybe don't talk to her about school more than you absolutely have to right now. That was a topic that was most likely to make Amity break down at the moment, so it was important for Camila to know to avoid it. Then, Luz started telling her mom the same kinds of things she had told her about her other friends. She likes reading. She even read to kids at the library where she's from and loves doing voices. I swear, it's the cutest thing I've ever seen. She's into Azora like I am. I don't know for sure, but that even might be the reason she dyed her hair. She likes sweet food way more than any other type, although she'd die before admitting that out loud. But the way her eyes light up speak volumes. She can dance really well. We danced together at an event during camp, and we had so much fun that I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. Oh, and she really likes flowers. But she's a bit embarrassed about that, and weirdly enough, she likes them way more when they're from me than when they're from Willow, despite the fact that Willow's way better at the plant. She was able to stop herself just in time before the word magic slipped out. Tss. Luz continued on like that for a couple more minutes, talking about the most casual things like they made Amity the most amazing girl on the planet. Camila's smile widened with every word, and she couldn't help but think that this was one of the very rare occasions where she actually did understand her daughter and the reason her eyes were sparkling. "You like Amity, don't you?" Camila asked after her daughter had finished her quick rundown on everything she liked about her friend from camp. Luz beamed. "Of course I do! Amity is amazing! She's smart and funny and kind and brave and pretty. What's there not to like about her? I still can't believe someone like her would want to be my friend." Camila smiled, her suspicions confirmed despite the answer not being all that related to her actual question. "Luz, honey, that's not what I meant." It took a bit for the realization to dawn on her daughter's face. "You're too much like your father sometimes," Camila mused, trying her hardest to swallow the pain that followed the thoughts right on its tail. "Oh." Luz started chuckling nervously when she finally realized what her mother was asking. "Oh, no, I don't think..." She paused, struggling to find the right words, and actually not quite sure how to answer that. In all honesty, she hadn't spent a lot of time reflecting on her feelings for Amity while they'd been on the Boiling Isles. Among all the magic and exciting dangers of the demon realm, the way Amity made her heart flutter when she was with her had been a bit of an afterthought. But now that Luz thought about it, everything she just told her mom, the time she and Amity had spent, the way she got protective around her, how nervous Amity made her, and the way she always wanted to be Amity's hero, her fearless champion. All of these things added up into a single picture. Sometimes, when Luz closed her eyes, all she could see was Amity's face. All she could hear was Amity's laughter, and all she could think of was wanting to make her smile over and over and over again, for the rest of forever. And she had thought about kissing her for a second 2 days before. That meant something, didn't it? Uh-oh. Luz could feel the color drain from her face. This was bad. This was really, really, really bad. She couldn't be in love with Amity. Truth be told, Luz had never thought about being in a relationship. It wasn't like she never wanted to go on a date before. The stories she read always made them seem super fun and exciting. But someone actually liking her? Romantically? That thought had always seemed ridiculous to her. People in this realm didn't like her. They thought she was a weirdo. And while Luz herself knew that wasn't a bad thing, being different was what made people special. Had they all been the same, the world would have been a really boring place. Being treated like an outsider pretty much all of your life did something to your confidence. The summer in the Boiling Isles had helped. She had real friends now that liked her for who she was. But that didn't mean Luz suddenly thought she'd be the Hecate to anyone's Azora anytime soon. Especially not Amity's. Luz? Her mother's voice stopped Luz's racing train of thoughts abruptly. She took a deep breath and got a hold of herself. "I don't know, Mommy," she sighed audibly. "I like Amity a lot, as you may have realized from my excited rambling about her. There's so many things I like about her, and she never fails to make me smile, and the thought of hurting her makes my heart ache too. But I've never really liked anyone like that before. And even if I did know how that feels and was sure that's what I'm feeling, Amity already has a lot on her mind right now. With everything she's going through at the moment, what I do or don't feel for her doesn't really matter. All that matters is that I'm there for her, that I support her and help her through this no matter what. Confessing to her and making things awkward between us is the absolute last thing this situation needs in addition to everything else she has already going on." Amity would be staying with them for weeks. Messing their relationship up now was the absolute worst thing Luz could have done. The good news was, she would have plenty of time to maybe hopefully sort out whatever these confusing feelings meant that she might or might not be experiencing whenever she looked at Amity. She'd put more thought into how she acted around her and would pay closer attention to her friends' reactions. And then, maybe she'd be able to sort out the chaos in her head. Once that was done, once she was sure, she could still figure out if she should tell Amity or not. "Oh, Carlino." Camille pulled her daughter into another hug. When had she become so responsible? "You've really changed a lot over the summer, haven't you?" Camille felt pride and guilt rise in her chest at the realization. It was wonderful that her daughter stood up for what was right and did everything she could to help her friend. But Luz was just 14. She was still a child. Camilla hadn't meant for her to grow up quite this fast. She didn't have time to dwell on this because a moment later, they heard movement on the stairs. "Amity," Luz whispered. When she saw her friend standing at the bottom of the staircase, looking really upset and probably the most exhausted she'd had ever seen her, everything else was forgotten in an instant. She immediately rushed to Amity's side and gently pulled her into a hug. "Hi, Luz." Amity buried her head in her friend's shoulder. "How are you feeling?" I don't know." Amity bit her lip. "Still not great, I think." She'd left her hair down, and after struggling to get herself out of bed, had put on the long-sleeved purple top and jeans that Luz had picked out for her. She'd also put the beanie back on. Even if she didn't need it to hide her ears anymore, it just made her feel comfortable. Are you hungry? You should eat something, Luz said, trying not to sound pushy, but still immensely worried. Amity just shook her head. She didn't feel much like eating right now. She'd barely eaten the evening before either. Her appetite was all but gone entirely now. I won't let you leave the house without having breakfast. Camila looked a bit stern, but it was obvious that she was mostly just concerned. Amity was kind of touched by that, and that realization hurt at the same time because she knew her own parents wouldn't have cared. Quite the opposite. In fact, had she been running late, she'd probably have been ushered out of the house without breakfast, so she'd still get to school in time. The good news was, Camila was definitely convinced they were telling the truth now. The bad news was, Amity was actually the broken mess she pretended to be. I really don't think I can eat right now, Miss Noseda. I'm not feeling very well. Her head was still spinning from everything that had happened the day before, so much that she almost felt sick because of it. Everything was just too much. She was really surprised she managed to get out of bed at all, especially because she barely slept instead of waking up screaming from some stupid nightmare about grades or her parents or Lilith yelling at her. And each time she'd woken loose in the process, who instead of getting mad at her had just turned the lights on and held her until she calmed down a bit, the same way she was right now. I'm so sorry, Luce whispered, gently stroking her hair. She felt so incredibly guilty about this whole situation. All of this because of a stupid hair clip. I wish this never happened. And even if the reason had been something else, nothing would have ever been worth seeing Amity this shattered. Had there been any way to undo this, Luce would have taken it without hesitation, even if it'd mean never seeing Amity again. There are very few things I wouldn't be willing to do for her, aren't there? Don't apologize. It isn't your fault, Amity mumbled through her sobs, snuggling against Luce's chest. I'm so thankful for everything you've done for me the last few days. And in the last couple of months, if she was being honest, Luce had turned her entire life upside down in the best way possible. She wouldn't trade that for the world. This whole mess was no one's fault but Amity's own, least of all Luce's. There was no reason for her to feel guilty. That was the last thing Amity wanted. They remained cuddled up on the couch like that for a couple more minutes until Camila reminded them that Luce had to go to school. Luce tensed a little at that, hoped nobody noticed, and got up. Camila decided to take her by car since she wanted to talk to the principal about Amity in person anyway. Amity was not very excited at the prospect of getting into one of the things that had made Luce so freaked out when they first got into this realm, despite the fact that her crush seemed perfectly calm now. Is this thing going to eat me now because I caused your mom so much trouble? Amity whispered when they got closer to the car, visibly freaked out. Luce shook her head and snorted. Of course not! It's not... Mom would never hurt you. And cars don't eat people, I promise. Her friend was still unconvinced. Do you know for sure they also don't eat elves? She whispered. I do. Well, technically she didn't, since she was pretty sure no elf had ever stepped inside a car before. But since cars couldn't actually eat anything, Luce considered it a pretty safe bet. She opened the door and climbed onto the back seat first, gesturing for Amity to follow, which, after another moment of hesitation, she did. I guess this isn't so bad, Amity mumbled after a while of sitting there peacefully with the weird extendable sling around her, suppressing a shriek when the car suddenly started vibrating. She barely managed to keep her voice down. It's going to eat us! Luce reached for her friend's hand and squeezed it soothingly. It's not going to eat us. This is perfectly normal. But despite the reassurance and despite the fact that nothing actually happened aside from the moving, Amity didn't let go of Luce's hand until they stopped in front of the school. For Amity, the rest of the day passed by in a blur. They talked to a lot of different people and went to a bunch of different buildings, almost all of which, except the school, she didn't even recognize the name of. She's very confused by most of them, letting Camila do almost all the talking unless she was asked about something directly. The less she said, the less she could say that would sound weird to anyone from this world after all. Throughout the entire day, she was lost in her thoughts, still not entirely able to grasp what had happened and what it meant for her in her future that she wasn't able to attend her real school now. Just how lost in her thoughts she was didn't go unnoticed by the woman she was with, who couldn't help but offer the girl to talk to her about what was on her mind if she wanted to. Even if Amity didn't end up telling her anything, it was important to at least try, to let the girl know that the possibility was there, even if she wasn't ready yet. Penny for your thoughts? Amity gave Camila a startled look and shook her head. They're not for sale. Selling one's thoughts was a highly illegal practice in the bowling aisles because it was extremely dangerous. It could permanently tear apart a being's mind. Is that different here? Camila wasn't sure if the reply was supposed to be a joke or not. It was hard to tell from the girl's expression, but she decided to just word what she meant a little differently in case it hadn't been. Amity's English was perfectly fine otherwise, but this wasn't the first time Camila had noticed a reaction like this to a relatively common saying. I just meant, you probably have a lot on your mind right now. I know I'm not loose, but if there's anything you want to get off your chest, you could talk to me, okay? Oh. Amity bit her lip. That's sweet, Miss Nocetta, but I really don't think... The more she told her, the more likely it was that she let something slip that aroused suspicion. So she wasn't sure how smart it was to talk to her in a situation where Luce wasn't around to save her from saying something wrong. If you're not ready, that's okay. Just know that I'll be there for you whenever you are, alright? Amity felt tears welling up in her eyes again. Thank you, she mumbled, her voice cracking. Of course. Camila smiled softly at her, then couldn't help but notice Amity staring at one of the food stands. Come on, let's grab lunch somewhere, okay? I'm getting hungry too. Amity hesitated, a bit embarrassed that Camila had realized what she was looking at, but her grumbling stomach was very persistent. So eventually, to Camila's relief, she gave in. Luce spent about half an hour crying in bed after she got home from school. Over the summer, she'd almost managed to forget how bad school in this realm was. And now that she knew what it was like to attend a school where she actually had friends and where she fit in, it seemed even worse. Eventually, she forced herself to get up and do the homework she'd been given, hoping to finish it before her mom and Amity got home, and surprisingly actually succeeding. When the two of them finally got home, Camila was visibly extremely annoyed while Amity just looked exhausted and guilty. She felt horrible for causing Luce's mom so much trouble, especially because they weren't even being honest with her. Everything okay? Luce asked when she walked down the stairs, hugging both of them by way of greeting. It's going to be fine. Camila hugged her back. Just a bunch of bureaucratic nonsense that I'm hoping we'll be able to take care of soon enough. Hopefully at least some of it tomorrow. I swear, half the people we talked to today gave me the impression they had no idea what their job was. She sighed. But, oh well. It wasn't like she'd expected this to be easy, but she was more than willing to make an effort, even if that meant sacrificing both of her days off for it. Hopefully she could take a couple of days of vacation sometime soon to spend time with the girls and get more of this sorted out. While Camila was busy warming up leftovers from the day before, the girls snuck upstairs to change Amity's bandages again. During dinner, although Amity was still taking a bit slow, she was eating properly again. That was a huge relief to both Luce and her mom. Once they'd finished eating, Amity and Luce spent the rest of the evening watching Little Witch Academia, cuddled up on the couch with a woolen blanket and some tea. Camila let them have the TV for the entire evening while she made a couple more phone calls, and then sat down at the table to finish reading the book she'd started about a week before, occasionally glancing over at the girls. It was good to see them having fun together despite everything that was happening. And while Camila didn't really see the appeal of the show, she didn't have to. Since Luce was already done with her homework, there was no reason to not let them watch it. And since Amity needed a distraction right now, Camila would probably have gone easy on her daughter anyway. In the middle of all this, a couple of notes from teachers about forgotten homework were the least of her concerns. Luce was very happy that her friends seemed to enjoy the show they'd picked. Although the topic was, ironically, not just some faraway fantasy world, but instead at least somewhat close to the reality, watching it still seemed to help Amity take her mind off of everything and relax a little. Once she understood what a TV was, at least. And, while never quite laughing, Luz could see Amity break into a small smile every now and again, which was a huge step in the right direction. Luz herself was also having a pretty good time. It felt like ages since she'd last seen the show, and seeing the reactions of someone who had never seen it before was always fun. Eventually, Amity nodded off with her head on Luz's shoulder, and when Luz woke her up again, after being hesitant for a while because Amity needed to sleep and she looked so adorable, and also having her so close felt nice, they decided it was time to call it a night. End of part 1.